You know, from watching a single episode of Amazon's ludicrously expensive Lord of the Rings adaptation, you'd be forgiven for wondering if the whole thing's not simply an outright parody of Tolkien's work. From taking a 6'4" graceful warrior elf and turning her into a 5'3" stunning and brave girl boss what don't need no man, to forcing current day political agendas and tick box diverse casting quotients by shoehorning in black female dwarfs and some sort of Latino Don Lemon with one facial expression as a friggin' elf.
Bruh.
The show, by all accounts, is a complete insult to the legacy of one of the most talented, influential, and detail oriented fantasy writers of the 20th century, and of course the fantasy genre as a whole. Well, seems they weren't quite done with subverting an iconic and traditional masterpiece for the purposes of a modern audience, because now they've gone and totally outdone themselves in season 2, by introducing loving orc families who just want to live a quiet life in a cottage or some shit, and farcically attempting to make sympathetic beings out of vicious and irredeemable corrupted creatures. Well, at least they're a two-parent nuclear family, I suppose. Though it's a bloody sad state of affairs when the only depiction of such tradition we can get on TV these days has to feature ugly, crusty, oppressed minorities in it. Anyway, showrunners JD Payne and Patrick McKay, who tellingly have never written a single thing before being handed the keys to the most expensive show ever made, and just making you wonder what on earth they must have done behind the scenes to earn such a privilege.
Now you touch it. You know what to touch.
Banana!
Told TV Insider that the orc father named Glug is, quote, meant to show that the orcs aren't just mindless creatures that will follow orders from their leader. They too have personal stake in the fate of their kind. McKay then adds that while they're not trying to make the orcs any less vicious creatures, they are invested in making them more three-dimensional characters. We are always looking to give the world greater depth and greater emotional depth, hopefully. Yeah, mate, because the importance of having three-dimensional relatable orcs with deep character arcs is exactly what was missing from the source material of original texts, and orcs worrying about the state of their village and keeping up with their monthly mortgage payments was exactly the elements just holding Tolkien's work back from being a bona fide masterpiece, come to think about it.
No!
So this image has since aggravated the fanbase, and I'm not surprised, really. After all, one of the key themes of Tolkien's story is that evil cannot create and only destroy. So why are the orcs depicted here as loving family men who just want to live quietly with a white picket fence? Why do they even have babies when evil should be rendered sterile by the mere fact that they cannot create? Whilst I'm aware Tolkien vaguely hinted in a letter external to the source material one time that orcs could presumably possibly have children potentially, I'd prefer to think of them reproducing via a campaign of corruption to contort the souls of others, rather as demons do in our own mythologies IRL. And they of course go on to do the same with that Sauron fella in the show, as Season 2 director Charlotte Brandstrom, who herself is part of a mandated all-female directing team for the second season because reasons, said in a recent interview that the all-powerful Dark Lord getting smacked into sludge by his own minions and then coming back hell-bent on revenge for getting smacked into sludge by his own fucking minions was a great introduction to his character. Because, quote, what the showrunners are really trying to show is that everybody is a real character. The evil characters aren't just black, they have a lot of nuances to them.
Okay.
Brandstrom then went on to say that it was important for them to make sure that Sauron isn't 100% evil, because Sauron wants to help everybody, but he wants to do that with the ultimate power and the ring. And there you go, folks. Sauron is really a good boy what didn't do nothing. I mean, far be it from me to question the judgment of a Hollywood TV director who clearly knows better than myself and also one of the single greatest literary writers of the 20th century, but do we really need orcs and Sauron to have shades of grey in an archetypal story that is practically black and white and about good versus evil? There are many villains and baddies in the world of Middle-earth that can be written with shades of grey, as well as protagonists, mind you. I mean, heck, that's the whole bleeding point of having rings that corrupt the minds and hearts of the heroes who wear them, after all. But I think characters like Sauron and the orcs should remain transparently and irredeemably evil in a mythology like this. I mean, Sauron is essentially a stand-in for Satan in this world, and the orcs his dutiful demons. Both are relentless, merciless forces who exist only to conquer and dominate. And no matter what the dopes on Twitter try to gaslight us with, he is absolutely based on the Christian devil. And whilst I can acknowledge as Tolkien does that Satan was of good heart at the start, he indeed yet fell to pride and power lust as all tyrants do. But if we've now reached such heights of moral subjectivism that we're now implying even the devil himself is shades of grey and is not wholly evil, then there really exists no moral absolutes in any place, anywhere anymore. Satirical ambiguity aside, orc families and good guy Sauron just seems like hyperliberalism taken to its extreme. I mean, what next? Mostly peaceful xenomorphs who complain about being marginalised for being illegal black aliens? Or that Palpatine was just a lonely grandpa who lashed out over insecurities about his skin condition? At the end of the day, I think this is simply a sign that liberals should not be adapting Christian conservative fiction. They fundamentally cannot understand that some creatures are simply born evil, as the liberal doctrine asserts that men are blank slates, and all compulsions toward evil has historical nuances and lived experiences of learned behaviour. Which is weird, given this is an ideological group who spent most of the 80s, 90s and 2000s insisting people are born gay and defo not groomed or socialised into it, lol, trust me bro. But why must all villains be relatable and nuanced, especially in high fantasy? Even in the real world, some people are just naturally born evil. I mean, did the prepubescent killers of James Bulger learn in their 10 years on Earth that killing is rational, practical, or brings some type of reward? Or did they just want to torture and murder another person just for the sheer fun of it? What was to be gained out of it, except the total thrill of power and domination over others? Is that learned behaviour, or is that merely a natural compulsion toward absolute evil? Do kids learn to pull legs off spiders as infants, or is it just a natural pull towards cruelty for fun in the moment? But I guess we should expect nothing less from Hollywood liberals who constantly fail to see the other side nor understand their ideological opponents. Anyone who criticises woke ideology and forced feminism in their media, for example, are just denounced and dismissed as toxic misogynist incel trolls who hate all women and progress, and are even now mocked in the very shows and products they complain about what are ironically full of woke ideology and false feminism. It's an inevitable result when you refuse to hire people outside of the cult-like groupthink that has captured an industry, and indeed actively weed out and constantly cancel anyone with a remotely libertarian or contrarian viewpoint, let alone a conservative way of thinking. Which is why all we seem to get these days in our media fiction is stunning and brave girl boss Star Trek captains, unprofessional twerking she-lawyers, and interracial lesbian space witches in the once family-orientated Star Wars franchise. But then, these are all the same type of people who say pedos aren't really evil but rather misunderstood, and rather that we should respect their natural born orientation and call them minor attracted people, who simply can't help who they're attracted to, yo. Because after all, love has no age limit apparently.
Hey, that's fucked up.
At its most charitable interpretation though, I suppose Amazon and their team of writers may just simply be trying to be subversive for the sake of modern audiences. To simply take a 70-odd-year-old text that's been adapted many times over and bring something new and unexpected to it which pertains to their worldview. Which would be fine, if we weren't dealing with a fictional universe that is totally antithetical to said worldview. And of course, if they weren't actively calling all critiques of their work racist and only coming from trolls who were never real fans in the first place. Because apparently, you're only a true fan if you never question any change to the law or aesthetic by a multi-million-dollar dogmatically liberal corporation on the likely imposed necessity of a cynical tick-boxing exercise, such as now having black dwarves and Hispanic elves in Middle-earth, and the casting of totally unsuitable actors for beloved classic characters, and where most couldn't even act their way out of a parking ticket. Ultimately, nothing is seemingly sacred anymore. And I can't even begin to imagine what twisted subversions and indignities we're going to be presented with in future seasons of this show. I mean, is Sauron going to end up having some kind of midlife crisis or moral epiphany and tearfully apologise to everyone he ever hurt for doing a bunch of bad things like a Natterkak? Is Isildur going to end up in an incestuous relationship with his Emma Watson looking like his sister bird because inclusivity is important now and sibling sexual attraction is kind of a real thing? And yeah, it may sound silly and far-fetched, but these dopes have already given us grimdark hobbits threatening to exile and essentially murder their fellow family members by decaravanning them and leaving them for dead in the wild. I mean heck, even fantasy stalwart Brendan Sanderson called them out a few years back, saying it's completely inappropriate to depict the happy hobbity faux Frodo types in this way. Because after all, when every hero and villain exists in shades of grey, how can you even begin to tell them apart?